The Kremlin is also not interested in any compromise in the negotiation process unless it means Ukraine's capitulation. This was stated in a report by analysts from the Institute for the Study of War. They referred to a number of statements by Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, in which he mainly repeats the rhetoric of Putin and Lukashenko voiced during their joint press conference.
In his statements, Lavrov placed the responsibility for the lack of progress in negotiations on Ukraine and reaffirmed Moscow's unwavering commitment to its traditional demands. Lavrov also emphasized Russia's dedication to its long-standing military objectives in Ukraine and noted that any potential peaceful settlement must, so to speak, address the root causes of the war. From the report by analysts at the Institute for the Study of War,
we will discuss this topic further. Joining us now is Alexander Leonov, Executive Director of the Center for Applied Political Studies, Penta Diidinu Osates Ozamnons. Welcome to the broadcast. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Good morning.
Good morning.
Alexander, tell me, you know not so much about Vitkov's visit. We'll definitely discuss that, but I wanted to ask you something else. In your opinion, we all keep talking about this August 8th deadline, right? But is there an understanding of what exactly is supposed to happen, what the Russian Federation is supposed to do? Is there any clarity on this issue?
I think that at the very least, Donald Trump has clarity. The fact that he has started to speed up the process, and I think the main demand for the Russian Federation is agreement to a complete and unconditional ceasefire and the start of negotiations, both peace talks and, among other things, negotiations on the terms of this ceasefire. And this ceasefire should take place as soon as possible. And, the fact that Donald Trump has started to put pressure on both Russia and the allies. And this, by the way, is a very significant difference between his policy and Joe Biden's, because Joe Biden's America primarily put pressure on Russia. Now, former President Donald Trump wants to put significant pressure on the allies, specifically on the various countries that continue to buy Russian oil. And this particular strategy could also prove to be quite effective, because if Russia ultimately has absolutely nowhere to sell its valuable oil, it simply won't have any financial resources or money whatsoever. And the fact is, now is the perfect time for exactly this kind of strategy, because just recently the OPEC Plus countries agreed on a new increase in oil production. So the loss of Russian oil on the market might go completely unnoticed, while Russia would lose its markets and, as a result, lose the ability to earn money. And it seems to me that for Donald Trump, Russia's war against Ukraine has finally become a war where he can gain benefits for America, including by putting pressure on China. He can outplay the trade war with China, this time having the European Union as an ally. I think that when the trade agreement with the EU was signed, this issue was also discussed. And now American officials are unanimously saying that they expect Europe to join Trump's tariffs against China. And for China, this will be a serious problem. And then Beijing will have to put pressure on Russia so that it at least agrees to a ceasefire. This is the result that Donald Trump can achieve here and now. And, well, basically say that I have achieved what no one else could.
Alexander, speaking of how Russia is reacting to this, I looked at what their political analysts are writing. One of the political analysts of the so-called counter-terrorist operation, Zharov, wrote that for the Kremlin to cover up a possible démarche by Steve Vitkov, it is necessary for Moscow to simply ignore Vitkov's visit, which is basically what is happening right now. But really, how does this démarche affect them? Did they understand it? And what's important here is that Trump stated that it was Russia who requested this meeting. So in this case, it puts them in a position of weakness.
Absolutely. Moreover, I want to point out that Steve Vitkov's visit was announced for Sunday. So Russia requested this visit in order to propose some new terms, some new ideas to be discussed, and Donald Trump once again postponed issuing the ultimatum, just like in May, when there was an ultimatum set for the end of May 12th regarding a complete and unconditional ceasefire. And then there was Putin's proposal about Istanbul and so on and so forth. We all remember this. And now the postponement of Vitkov's visit to Moscow literally on the eve of the ultimatum's implementation suggests that Trump is not interested in Russia's proposals. Trump wants to get a simple answer, yes or no. Moreover, he is doing this through Vitkov, because in Scotland, Donald Trump said that he is not interested in talking to Putin. Thus, America is putting Russia not only in a position of weakness, but essentially in a position where the country has no say at all. It must answer either yes or no. And the next step, I think, for Donald Trump would be, if you say no, we'll deal with the big players, with China, and we won't talk to you anymore.
And tell me, Alexander, if we're talking about Witkov's visit, right? And let's focus our attention on what goals might be behind this. Well, usually when you're making threats, you probably wouldn't think about having some special envoy present at negotiations. I mean, so the question is, what's the point?
Let's remember, this was the Kremlin's tactic. And it's not the first time, and I don't think it'll be the last, that Medvedev has made such statements, although perhaps he'll have to tone it down a bit, because the situation has become quite interesting now. If before no one paid attention to Medvedev's statements, now he's found an appreciative audience in the White House. And for Donald Trump, Medvedev's words addressed to American officials, Trump's associates, or directly to him, are words that Putin allows to be said. I'm convinced that Donald Trump believes that if Putin didn't agree with this, this wouldn't have been written. And thus, this irritation of Russia by Putin grows into personal animosity and personal offense. And it seems to me that Medvedev contributed to this tough approach. And the fact that Donald Trump, in response to Medvedev's statement, said, well, we're sending 2 nuclear missile carriers. This, among other things, is an emotional response that shows, if you want escalation, we can play that game too. We can also play the nuclear escalation game. And here, as Donald Trump likes to say, it turns out that Russia has no cards left. Because let's remember, Beijing has drawn a rather strict red line for Russia, no use of nuclear weapons. Because according to Russian doctrine, Russia could have already used nuclear weapons multiple times after strikes on Russian nuclear triad facilities and so on and so forth. So right now, these are just empty words. And for example, in the Japanese parliament, during a session of the relevant committee, it was stated quite openly that this was precisely about Beijing's ultimatum to Moscow. And from this point of view, in fact, it's important for Donald Trump to prove that Russia's nuclear threats are a bluff. And if this significant bluff is exposed, it's abundantly clear that Vladimir Putin will have absolutely no effective means left to truly blackmail either the United States of America or the entirety of Europe. And from this crucial perspective, it's entirely possible to significantly increase the sustained pressure and truly ramp up the vital support for Ukraine. Yes, right now, this is quite a remarkably profitable scheme for the United States of America. Weapons are being sold, and they're being sold to NATO. And it's quite an interesting point that it's NATO specifically that is supplying Ukraine with weapons. In this way, Donald Trump removes political responsibility from himself in front of his voters. It's not me personally giving all these weapons to Ukraine, it's NATO that buys them and then delivers them. And this could, for example, open up opportunities to expand the range of supplies. Back in the day, Joe Biden considered the possibility of supplying Ukraine with GSM-M cruise missiles, which have a range of several hundred kilometers and in fact could really influence the course of events and disrupt the Russian offensive that is being talked about in Moscow, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it seems to me that right now, with pressure coming from both sides, strengthening aid to Ukraine and increasing pressure on Russia's allies, it should ultimately lead to some results. Because when not only Western countries, but also Beijing start putting pressure on Russia, it's clear that Putin will have no choice but to at least start talking about a ceasefire.
Alexander, thank you very much. Well, we will, of course, keep an eye on this situation and on the development of these negotiations, which seem not to have started yet, and apparently Witkov hasn't arrived yet, but nevertheless, we understand that some negotiations are taking place, and Witkov will definitely not come empty-handed, but probably with some arguments and facts. Alexander Leonov, Executive Director of the Center for Applied Political Studies, Penta, was with us on the line.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.